Hello, good morning, everyone. This is Playbook's managing editor and author, Jack Blanchard. It is Thursday, May the 1st. That is May Day, where I come from. Zack Stanton, is it May Day in America? Is that a thing here?
It's not a thing to the same degree as in Europe, I think, but certainly among certain lefty types and union activists, it's a big thing within those crowds, but definitely not to the same degree as in Europe.
I would be deeply hurt if anyone accused me of being a lefty type or a union activist. But in Britain, people dance around a maypole with all these coloured streamers. Have you ever seen that? It's kind of this weird.
I've seen it. It feels a little like midsummery to me, yes.
Yeah, it's kind of creepy, to be honest. Anyway, as you can hear, listeners, I am here with Playbook's deputy editor, Zack Stanton, today. And tell us where you are, Zack, because that's quite interesting in itself.
I'm here in Macomb County, Michigan, which is where Donald Trump held his 100-day rally on Tuesday. It was a place he chose for its political salience. It's historically the home of the Reagan Democrats. I attended the rally to report on it, and I've remained here where I grew up.
It's not just the home of the Reagan Democrats, but the Stantons of Michigan as well. Okay, well, we'll talk about that in a sec. What's driving the day, listeners, is essentially it's the economy, stupid. Again, on the back of yesterday's surprisingly bleak-looking GDP figures for the first quarter of 2025, we've got the Vice President, J.D. Vance, jetting off today to make a speech about U.S. manufacturing. He'll be speaking at a steel plant in South Carolina, and he'll be taking Fox News along for the ride. Why not? They will be doing a sit-down interview with him there, and he'll be keen to talk about how Donald Trump's tariffs are going to create a renaissance in US manufacturing, which some people will be delighted by and some people will be skeptical about. The president himself will be facing more questions on the economy today, of course, as well as other things. He's participating in a National Day of Prayer ceremony at the White House Rose Garden this morning. He'll be speaking also at the University of Alabama later tonight. And I dare say he might be popping up in other places as well, because he seems to do about 6 different media appearances a day, much to my journalistic delight. Let's talk about the economy, Zack. Numbers were slightly harsh on the government actually yesterday. I think if you drill down into it a little bit, it seems that because so many people were importing so many goods very quickly in the first quarter, because of Donald Trump's incoming tariff policy, that actually kind of made the economic picture look worse than it was. But the truth is, most people won't know that. They'll see the stats and it'll add to the economic gloom. And economic gloom is not good for a president so early in his tenure, right?
No, definitely not. And I think it's a real challenge for Donald Trump in particular, because he is someone who ran for president and was elected largely on the idea of him going to be reviving the economy and shaking it out of its doldrums and bringing prices back down. And for him to say, as he did in a cabinet meeting yesterday, that your kids will maybe have $2 instead of 30 at Christmas time and you'll pay a little bit more for them. It's not exactly an appealing message. People don't like being told, your kids will have less and you'll pay more for it. And I think that's one of the things the Trump White House is struggling with from a messaging standpoint. We saw yesterday the president said on Truth Social that, no, this isn't the Trump stock market. This is still the Biden stock market. And in normal circumstances and a normal presidency about 3 months in, you could argue that the stock market doesn't fully reflect what the new administration is doing. And I get that argument, and there's something to that. But in this particular circumstance, you can't really look at the facts and say that the Trump factor hasn't been priced in. And that's a challenge because you can't do this sort of flood the zone approach where your goal is to show how powerful and in charge you are, how you're bending things to your will, and to declare that America's golden age has begun, and at the same time say that, no, in fact, actually, you're not in charge of the economy in this one particular way. And that's one problem. The other problem is that you can't make this ongoing argument that this is the Biden economy. There's a sell-by date on being able to make that claim. At a certain point, you're the president, you own it. And the challenge there is that it's very easy in the course of an election to say, I'm better than the alternative, because you are having a choice between 2 choices. But you're now the president. You are the choice. You're not running against someone else. You're now running against other people's expectations of you. And that is an altogether much more difficult case to make, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting that the political campaigns and indeed governments test out different messages, that they have their sort of message carriers, in this case, the president, that they want them to give out about different policies. And they test these messages, right? They focus group them. They try them out on people. They see which ones really land and people really like them, and they see which ones don't. And I think with the tariffs, this idea of bringing manufacturing back to America, we used to build things in this country. People really like that message, at least in the abstract. abstract. When you actually say to them, hey, do you want to go and work in a factory making iPhones? There don't seem to be that many people who want to do it, right? But as a political message, as a fundamental idea of what people want their country to be like and what it used to be like, people really seize onto that. And I think that's what we're going to hear from J.D. Vance today. The contrast with Donald Trump's throwaway comment, as you say yesterday, oh, maybe children will have $2 instead of $30, and maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more. I would love to see that message focus group. That is a catastrophic message for any leader of a country to be giving, based upon not some disaster which has befallen America. This isn't like, hey guys, we're in a pandemic again, or global crash, we're going to have to pull together. No, this is this guy's own flagship policy that he's believed in for 30 years, that he is imposing upon the country against the advice of most mainstream economists, right? You don't want to be giving the message that like your kids' toys are more expensive and you won't be able to afford as many of them. I think it's an extraordinary thing for him to have said. And I suspect that his opponents will be clobbering him round the head with that one for many months to come.
I think that's true. And even if you are a president who's trying to do this as sort of maybe in the most altruistic way, as a sort of anti-materialist approach, Donald Trump isn't the one to make that argument.
With the gold gilded ceilings and,
exactly.
And all the rest of it. Right? Yeah, completely agree. Trying to blame it on Biden seems to be it's a better message than that. And the rally you were at in Michigan on Tuesday night, that was a message we were hearing from him there in front of his own supporters as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. And you saw the sort of contrast of the Biden era bad, we're bringing the pride back. And it's especially resonant, this manufacturing message in places like Macomb County and the industrial Midwest, where, you saw the large signs that said, jobs, jobs, jobs was one of them. Another one was buy American, hire American. You had auto workers for Trump there en masse. And it is something that really resonates to people. People take pride in the idea of things being made in their country and being made by people in their communities. And it speaks in places like Macomb County to this idea of a quality of life being something that was attainable. You didn't need to go to college to have a great quality of life. You could go straight from high school to working in a factory. You would have a factory job that would set you up for life, for a stable economic well-being. That's not so much the case anymore, but it really harkens back to this nostalgia people have for this era and the sense of security that came along with it. And that's really what people want to feel, economic security. And I think that's the challenge right now, is that you have this message on the one hand of wanting to bring back economic security at the same time as the economy feels very unstable and things feel very uncertain, particularly in light of the sort of whipsawing tariffs.
Yeah, I totally respect people feeling that way, and it makes perfect sense. You can feel the pull of that desire and that message. The question, obviously, is: are Donald Trump's policies actually going to achieve that? And I was speaking to someone who, a big cheese guy from Wall Street at the weekend, was saying he was complaining about the tariffs quite vociferously. And I was saying, well, trying to put the other side, well, look, is it possible that this is going to be a good policy for working class or middle class America in the way that Donald Trump says? And he says, no, maybe in about 40 years, but like the amount of time it would take to bring all of this manufacturing back, he said, well, is not something that happened in the term of one presidency, obviously. Secondly, he's like, who's going to invest in their factory in America right now when there's so much uncertainty? This week the tariffs are this, next week the tariffs are that. This is not a stable policy. And full well that if the Republicans lose the next presidential election, it's pretty unlikely that the next president is going to maintain tariffs, certainly anything like we've seen at the moment, maybe to a degree, but nothing like this. So that doesn't add to the certainty environment that you want for people to invest in manufacturing plants.
That's absolutely right. And, it reminds me a bit, as you were just saying that, I couldn't help but think of actually the Biden administration and how they talked about the fact that his legacy wasn't going to be measured in years, but in decades. And like the things he was doing right now are investments that aren't going to pay off right away, but, just watch decades down the line. And the trouble with that argument, of course, was that it was very easy to claw back parts of his legacy. These aren't necessarily things that'll last. And even if you're making the argument, well, these Trump tariffs are going to have huge payoffs in, 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line, that would assume that we're continuing those tariffs after his presidency ends. And that seems far from certain, given that we're 100 and some days into the presidency, and it's already uncertain whether or not those tariffs are going to last.
Quite. And of course, Biden wasn't exactly getting a political payoff for this grand decades-long vision. He had miserable poll ratings in the 30s, whatever they were, before he eventually, was forced to drop out of the whole contest and they lost the election. So, much as I admire people who want to do long-term planning for the nation, you kind of need a short-term plan if you want to actually be able to stay in power to keep delivering it. All right, Zack Stanton, thank you so much for joining us from Michigan today. Those are the main things that are happening today. You should also all be keeping a close eye on Congress, as Dasha and I were saying on this podcast yesterday, because that story about the Republicans' big, beautiful bill, as Donald Trump calls it, is moving quite quickly now, and there's a big row going on around Medicaid. So I will be keeping a close eye on that today. And for more of our thoughts on this and anything else you need to know today, please read Playbook this morning and every morning at politico.com/playbook. Thank you, Zack. Nice to talk to you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. This is Jack Blanchard. Thank you very much for listening.